Hello, everyone. We're now joined by Peter Diamandis to dive a bit deeper into space. Peter started over 20 companies in the areas of longevity, space, venture capital, education, and more. And we're very excited to have him here today. Peter, thanks for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure. This goes back to childhood passions for me, and what was crazy ideas are becoming real at like sort of an exponential rate. It's extraordinary time to be alive in humanity.
I read an article saying you started giving space lectures at 8 years old to anyone who would listen and draw them in. And you've been investing and starting companies in the space for so long. Can you kind of take us through your journey in the space industry?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in the 60s, and it was two things that got me massively passionate about space. The first was the Apollo program, and it showed us what we could do. I mean, humanity could actually land on the moon using less technology than in your watch. And then that scientific documentary called Star Trek that showed us where humanity was going, right? So it's like, this is where we're going, and it lit me on fire. And everything I did, I came from a medical family and who wanted me to become a doctor. I said, oh, okay, I can become a doctor. They'll help me become an astronaut. But everything I did was around that passion that it was during my lifetime and during the lifetime of everybody listening that we are moving off the planet irreversibly to become a multi-planetary species. We're going to take the eggs out of the basket and go to the moon, go to Mars, go to the asteroids, and go beyond. And there was like no way in hell that it was not going to be moving that fast, given how incredible Apollo was. And then things came to a screeching stop when, NASA and the space shuttle programs took so long to go. I gave up on my dream of becoming an astronaut, and I said, the real job here is going to be how do we ignite a commercial space industry? One where instead of going into space once in my life, I could go every weekend if I wanted, and where we create a engine to open up the space frontier that was independent of politics and was really based on capitalism, on we're going to go into space to create real value for humanity that generates capital that gets reinvested and moves us forward. And so that became my flip of an astronaut to a space entrepreneur. Started a bunch of companies, a company called Zero Gravity. Everybody listening can go into Zero G. We have a 727. And just go to gozerog.com and your weightless, exact real weightlessness. Another company called Space Adventures. Since there was no commercial US vehicles, we went to Russia and brokered with the Russian Space Agency to take people to the up in orbit to the space station. And Dennis Tito here in LA was our first customer for 20 million. The price started going up. It's upwards of 50, 60 million now. Anusha Ansari and Richard Garriott and many others went that way. And it was then, how do I make it affordable? And I was reading a book called The Spirit of St. Louis that chronicles the story of Lindbergh. And it turns out Charles Lindbergh flew from New York to Paris, not on a whim, but to win a $25,000 prize. And I was like, interesting, a prize. I wonder if I can create a prize for private space flight. And ultimately, it turned into something called the X Prize. It was a $10 million prize. An amazing woman, Anusha Ansari, funded it. And that $10 million prize attracted 26 teams from around the world who spent $100 million going after it. That prize drove sort of a change in people's belief that it's not just for governments. We got the FAA to rewrite the rules to allow for commercial spaceflight. And, it was in the course of that journey that I got to know Richard Branson, who bought the winning technology off of Burt Rutan and Paul Allen. Jeff Bezos I'd known since college, and Elon I met in 2000 when he was just selling PayPal to eBay. And I think the early X Prize lit the fuse for commercial spaceflight. And hard to believe it's been 17 years since the X Prize was won in 2004, but a lot happening. So that's
Seems like
the quick version.
yeah, the it really unlocked the entrepreneurial spirits. Could you talk a little bit about, like, within the context of our modeling, it's actually the technology platform that we focus, or the technology that has it's in kind of earliest stage, and it's least, I think, we can't quite tell what's going to be built on top of it. There's the low Earth orbit connectivity. What do you think is going to flower out of this, like, spirit of entrepreneurism?
Sure. Let me contextualize it this way. The early space program in the late 50s, the 60s, the 70s, 80s, even into the early 90s, was all about taking military ICBMs, right, warheads, pulling the warhead off and putting a satellite and using that technology that was only a one-way delivery. It was, you're not going to reuse an ICBM. It was only light once and use once. But now the guidance and control was used instead of going to the other side of the planet to go into orbit. And these were expensive, right? These were systems built by military contractors who didn't worry about the budget. It was the Defense Department budget. And it was only these government players, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, and so forth, that were the aerospace industry. And then here comes the furry little mammals, the entrepreneurs who in the early 2000s and through today blossomed into a real industry. What shocks me is the amount of venture capital going into space, billions of dollars. And we've seen more space startups than ever before. You can imagine they began, as Sam, you were speaking to, they began the rocket business. And besides SpaceX, there is a dozen other launch companies that people should be paying attention to, and I can discuss them from Astra to Relativity Space to Virgin Orbit to Rocket Lab, and then they're the ride to space, and then the platforms on top of that in the near term is communications. We think of Starlink there, and imaging from Earth orbit. You can think of Planet Labs there, but the long-term value of space is going to be access to everything we hold of value here on Earth: metals, minerals, energy, real estate, are near infinite quantities in space. So that's one of my favorite subjects. Happy to get into it with you.
I think it is. Oh, go ahead, Brett.
There's a lot of resources out there. It seems like the economics of then deciding to bring those resources back down to Earth are probably pretty challenged, though I believe that if we are being expansive, right, that having the resources already up there is useful. Is that the right way to think about it? Or do you think that you can underwrite like a...
It is partly. It's getting resources from space that you use in space. So for example, right now, every rocket ever launched from the planet and every satellite that's gone beyond low Earth orbit to geostationary orbit, to the moon, to Mars, outer planets, every gram of fuel on those rockets has been brought from the Earth's surface at a cost of $10,000 dollars per kilogram or something like that. But what if you could use the fuel that you get from space, right? So what are these rockets burning? What is the Falcon 9 or even the space shuttle or the Russian Soyuz burning? It's burning majority oxygen with then kerosene or RP1 or methane, a carbon source. But oxygen is the majority of it. And ultimately, oxygen is something that's very prevalent on the surface of the moon. It's very prevalent in the form of ice, H2O, on these asteroids. And so if you can extract the water, break it down to hydrogen and oxygen, you've got fuel depots in space, which will be necessary. When you look at what, I'm a huge fan of Elon and the work that he's done. I don't think people can really appreciate how breakthrough, his work is compared to every other company out there. It's not like 2x or 10x, it's like 100x. When you look at Starship, which is going to be the dominant launch capability for large payloads and volume, for Starship to go to the moon and go to Mars, what's going to happen is you're going to launch a Starship to low Earth orbit. And then from the surface of the Earth, you're going to be launching a number of Starships that are delivering fuel to the original Starship to refuel it on orbit to go to the moon or go to Mars. And that's just expensive. So the goal in the end result is, can you create the fuel depots in space? And some of these asteroids are very rich in water. We call them comets when we see them. The cometary tail is ice crystals of the water sublimating off the comet and reflecting. But they're also rich in other metals, platinum group metals, platinum, palladium, iridium, osmium, and so forth. But again, the real estate, the fuels, the metals are, let's talk about that as 2030s businesses. In the 2020s, it's going to be communications and imaging and maybe some manufacturing. Manufacturing has been talked about for 30, 40 years, but it's never really gone mainstream in space yet.
And then to dive in on what you're saying, as the X Prize being this catalyst to shift from government to commercial, I think we're continuing to see that. We've had the SPAC boom, but where in that cycle do you think we are of space becoming, self-sufficient as a commercial business entity?
So on the commercial self-sufficiency, listen, SpaceX is pouring tons of money into Starship and to Starlink. If it had stopped at Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, it would be an extraordinarily profitable company on its own right now, right? It is. You have to remember that that when you launch a Falcon 9 and you recover the first stage, 9 engines there, you're recovering 80% of the value of that. And right now, customers are paying full bore, so it's a high profit margin vehicle. Other companies, there's a company I love called Astra that just went public recently, and Astra is built not the largest launch vehicle, but the smallest launch vehicle. They built a rocket that has the potential to launch 300 times per year. The idea is you can launch every day. So small companies, entrepreneurs who are looking to be able to run experiments and try things out in space can, in fact, very rapidly, fly them. So it's more like a FedEx van than an 18-wheeler.
What do you think? I mean, it kind of the kernel of Sam's question is maybe say it's widely understood that it would be nice for us to have like insurance against the Earth, where we have a colony in Mars and we're building a colony on the moon. But it seems like a collective action problem where you need like governments to fund kind of these colonies, or historically you would think you would have to. So what is, if that's going to happen through a commercial angle, what do you think the carrot is that can draw capital out into kind of these exploration phases? Is it the real estate side? Like Elon's going to be out there. Here's a parcel of land on Mars, or how could it actually be funded?
Yeah. So if we're going to go out, zoom out that far, which I love to, because it's really the creation of multi-trillion-dollar markets in space. It is going to be land rights and it's going to be resource rights. It always has been since the beginning of human ownership, right? So, when you land on Mars and you say, I claim this planet or this territory for the 100 people you brought here, I mean, who's going to stop you in that regard? Now, are you developing it? A few years back, I took a shot at building an asteroid mining company called Planetary Resources, and it was a challenge to capitalize. It was early in its development, but one of the things that we did was we got the laws changed, both in the U.S. and in Luxembourg, for ownership of asteroidal materials. And so, put a dent in that. I'll come back. Majority of my investments these days in my companies I'm building are in the age reversal longevity space. I'll make my capital there and then bring it back into the space arena. But at the end of the day, we're going to see ownership, land rights, resource rights that are going to fuel. It can't just be government-based contracts. And we'll see entrepreneurs going for it. I mean, it is the biggest potential tabula rasa, sort of new world that's ever existed. I'll just say, while Elon is focused on going to Mars using Starship, Jeff is interested in going to the moon and then fulfilling a vision that of a mentor of both Jeff and myself, Gerard K. O'Neill. And his vision was, instead of going and landing back on the moon and building colonies there or going into a gravity well like Mars, why don't we instead grab materials from the asteroids and build what are called O'Neill colonies. These are rotating cylinders that might be a kilometer in diameter, rotating very slowly, but you're living on the inside with 1 million people in there, and you can replicate them. And Jeff's spoken about putting 1 trillion humans into space using these O'Neill colonies. And if you're doing that, you're basically building new land. You're not necessarily going and trying to claim a planetary body under UN rights. You're building new places to go and live, like we're building space stations in low Earth orbit. And of course, people may say, well, that's a crazy idea. But, we've got incredible tech coming in terms of AI and robotics and new material sciences, that if the idea is valued enough, those will materialize. I don't put those outside of the next 30-year horizon for us.
On that, I do think space is one of these areas. It's so complicated. You need convergence. It's pulling on everything it can get. Your most recent book is on convergence of technologies. How are you seeing that being applied in space? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so the notion is we're living in a very special time. We're in a period of rapid exponential growth of computation, quantum computers, AI, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology, augmented virtual reality, genomics and blockchain. And all of these are doubling in power every 18 to 24 months, and they're transforming business models every place. I think the commercial space revolution, and it really is a revolution compared to what we had just 20 years ago, where we're seeing hundreds of entrepreneurial startups in this space across the board. It's being made by converging exponentials, right? So another company I love, Relativity Space here in LA, Tim Ellis, is the CEO, they're 3D printing their entire rockets, right? So this is the ability to use new material science, converging with 3D printing, converging with machine learning pathways, and so forth, to build a rocket that you could size in different sizes. They have their first launch coming up in the next, probably 90 days, and then they hope to go head to head with something equivalent to Falcon 9. You've got other companies like Planet Labs and Starlink, and all of these are enabled by machine learning and AI. I mean, and another example is our ability to computer model. So it used to be, when you would build a rocket, you would do the best you could, you'd light the fuse, and you'd hope it works. Today, it's a very different world. As an entrepreneurial rocket creator, you're going to build the rocket, you're going to infuse it with hundreds, if not thousands, of sensors, measuring every vibration, everything going on. And then you will have built a very high fidelity computer model of the rocket. And you're running that computer model over and over and over and over again and refining it. So the first time that the rocket physically launches, you're pretty sure it's going to work. And if there's, the sensors give you the data to, refine the computer model the next time, and then it will work. So these convergence of technologies are extraordinary. And what they're ultimately doing is making it possible for, I hate to say it jokingly, but 2 guys in a garage to do something that was only doable by large scale defense contractors.
Seems like one of the big differences of like the entrepreneurial track versus the government track. It's not only like the cost plus distortions in the economic dynamics, but also, at least in SpaceX's case, their willingness to very publicly destroy their vehicles and publicly fail.
100%. 2 big points there to to reinforce, Brett. The first is the government way of doing contracting historically was you give us a proposal, we're going to give you the money, you have little to no at risk cost. It's the government's risk 100%. And in that scenario, if the contractor did something that, blew up or wasted money, then the agency, whether it's NASA, the Air Force, DARPA, whatever it is, would have egg on their face. So it's like, we don't want to take the risk. We're going to buy Big Blue. We're going to go with, the large defense contractors. And the entrepreneurs were not allowed in that game because they didn't have enough experience to make it a reasonable risk for the government to risk their budget on that. Then you had a situation, as with Elon, he made 140 million or so on selling eBay, PayPal to eBay, and he put $100 million of his own money on the table to build what was then the Falcon 1 and the Falcon 1E. It failed 3 times in a row. Luckily, on the 4th time, got it to work, and then got a $1 billion contract from NASA. So the entrepreneurs are doing it with risk capital. And because it's their risk capital, and because they need to differentiate themselves from the old style, they're willing to take bigger risks. And so they're going much edgier, and they're exploring different niches, and ultimately coming back and delivering a service to the government that they would be foolish not to take advantage of, because it's cheaper, it's higher quality, and it's really supporting, sort of American capitalism in this case.
Having seen and started so many startups, what do you look for in a space startup, or what advice would you give to any space entrepreneurs who may be out there listening? It is such a big idea, but there is room to succeed, as you're saying, more and more so than ever. So how would you? Yeah, go ahead.
And if you are a space entrepreneur, just tweet at me. I'm just at Peter Diamandis, and I'd love to know what you're doing to make this a two-way conversation. But the advice is ultimately, it's not about hoping and dreaming. It's about real engineering. It's about understanding what is possible in the realm of engineering. I think one of the things that distinguishes folks like Chris Kemp, the CEO of Astra, or Tim Ellis at Relativity, or Elon Musk at SpaceX, or Peter at Rocket Lab, is they're great engineers. They are great engineers. So it's really important for you to begin with very strong engineering, and then it's projecting where the technology is going to be in 3 years. It's like, if you're building something with the existing technology today, by the time you bring it to market, it's going to be out of date or not competitive. So where's 3D printing going? Where's AI and machine learning going? Where is, whatever technologies you want to be combining, where they're going to be in 3 years? What's going to be possible? And can you build a product or service that is intercepting where that technology is going to be? So by the time you're building it and selling it, it's on the cutting edge.
If you say we return to this conversation a decade from now, and things have fizzled, like it seems like the new space movement is not, it was just like a flash in the pan. What are the fail modes here? Like how would this not come to fruition the way we're envisioning it?
It's interesting, right? I have had this experience. So the original $10 million Ansari X prize for spaceflight was won in 2004 by Burt Rutan and Paul Allen. And if you had asked me back then, when do you think commercial, regular passenger travel, at least on suborbital vehicles, would be possible, I would have said at the outside, it's 5 or 6 years. It took 17 years from 2004 through 2021 when Virgin and Blue Origin started giving people flights. So space is hard. That's the first important thing. And people who are involved in space are optimists. I think you need to be. And so it's understanding the intersection of hard work and optimism. And then, one of the things that's luckily going for us as those of you who are fellow space cadets out there, is that we've got two of the wealthiest humans on the planet who are committed to this. I mean, Elon will spend every Dogecoin he has, every dollar he's got to get humanity to Mars. I mean, this is his passion, his mission, and he will keep going. I mean, and then the same for Jeff. I mean, I've known Jeff since for 40 odd years, since I had started a group called SED, Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, SEDS, when I was at MIT, and he started the Princeton chapter of SEDS. And I mean, he's been passionate. I remember meeting with him shortly after he'd started Amazon. I said, "What is this Amazon thing? I thought you wanted to do space." And he said, "Well, I'm going to make my money in Amazon and then I'll spend it in space," right? A simple two-step plan. And he's been true to that word. So, it's really great that both of them are that level committed to opening the space frontier, and both going in a slightly different direction. And that's incredibly valuable for humanity. So the challenge is going to be ultimately it's engineering. It's like it just takes time to do the engineering, to fail and win, and try over and over and over again. It's aggregating enough capital. Will the capital markets support this? I hope so. And you can see what both Elon and Jeff are doing, building traditional businesses in telecom with Starlink that will fuel, sort of cash flow for the rest of it. And then the third thing is, will governments interfere? I mean, those are the only three factors in my mind that are the biggest challenges. Will governments feel like don't trust commercial companies really going on their own to Mars or to the moon? They need to be under our protection or under our thumb, or the case might be, so we're going to slow it down for whatever reason. But ultimately, the analysis here that I think about is this is the late 1400s, early 1500s, and we are heading to the New World. And you could have asked all those explorers, what do you expect is going to happen in the New World? And I think none of them would have even understood a fraction of what happened over the next couple hundred years, of establishing new nations, of finding new resources, of really uplifting humanity, because we are an exploring species. We're genetically bred. I'm going to work in the genetics in a little bit to explore. It's what maintained us as a dominant species on the planet. And on a new frontier, it doesn't matter what you did before, what color your skin is, who you were born to. It's like, it's a meritocracy. Are you the best at doing this? And that drives a positive, vicious cycle. And so we're going to see that in space. I hope sooner rather than later, which is the other reason why I'm working on, sort of age reversal, because I want to see this stuff happen in space. So
then I guess with the last question, it's fitting, it was 17 years, but now we're here. We've got space tourism. How long until regular trips to Mars, do you think?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I remember having an in-depth conversation with Elon about his timing. Now, interestingly enough, right, he made a decision. He's going to kill the Falcon 9 line because Falcon 9 could not get humanity to Mars. And so he went down heavy on Starship, which is incredible. It's also an incredibly elegant vehicle, and I have every confidence he'll get it working. His original target was 2024. And I think it's a matter of the level of risk that he wants to take, and whether Starlink goes public to fuel it beyond. But I think before the end of this decade, I think in the next 4 years, we'll see Starship on the moon's surface. And I think you're probably 2 to 3 years before landing humans on Mars after that.
Great. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. Brett, do you have one final question or comment you're going to say?
No, I think I was going to say thank you because I think we're out of time. But Peter, really
Yeah.
loved having you on. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Look forward to being back. This is truly the most extraordinary time ever in the human race. I think people have no idea how, the next 20, 30 years are going to unfold on the ground or in space. Anyway, thank you guys. A pleasure.